This podcast is in partnership with Fill Your Boots. My mate Sean Phelan has been matching clubs with players and players with clubs for over 6 years to help get grassroots rugby games played. Head on over to fybrugby.com to register yourself or your club to help grow the game. You'll also be part of the Rugby Social Network and enjoy tons of resources, special deals and FYB TV. Go register at fybrugby.com today.
The headmaster was a guy called Mike Jenkin who played for the Pirates in Cornwall, and Mike was a rugby enthusiast. He used to teach us maths, but if maths clashed with the varsity match, we were all round to his to watch the varsity match.
Hello amateurs, welcome to episode 83 of the Amateur Rugby Podcast, here to help soothe your Sunday morning hangover with some quality rugby chat about the grassroots of the game. I'm your host Tim, and today I'm in Croatia, getting some well-earned rest and relaxation before the great Rugger Run kicks off next week. There'll be no rest then, as I'll be running every single day for 25 days straight, covering 500 miles from rugby club to rugby club around Scotland. It's all in aid of the My Name's Doddy Foundation. Head over to thegreatruggerrun.org to find out all the details and get involved. How did you enjoy last week's episode with Dickon Moon? He clearly spends plenty of time thinking about and analysing the game and its administration. I'd love to hear your feedback at AM Rugby Podcast on Twitter or email to hello@amateurrugbypodcast.com. And my guest this week is also London Cornish Director of Rugby, Dickon Moon, as we enjoy the second half of the interview we started last week. If you haven't listened to last week's show yet, I'd recommend pressing pause now and go and listen to that one first. This interview was recorded in August of 2022, and we talked about the ambitions of London Cornish, Dickon's coaching ethos, how it all began back in Redruth, Cornwall, and his playing days at Old Patesians, along with some unfinished business at HQ. Oh, and he also has a message for Eddie Jones. This is another cracking episode, so please welcome Dickon Moon. Another word that you mentioned a few times so far there is ambition. So what are your ambitions at the moment here for London Cornish?
Yeah, we're keen to be the best amateur club we can be, and on a professional footing. By that I mean that we want to be as professionally run as we possibly can be, so that lads who are professionals in London know they're playing at a decent standard of rugby, and it's thoroughly organised. They don't want for anything. We run 3 teams, all male adult at the minute. As I say, we're trying to start the minis, and I would hope that we can start a women's section as well in the future. I think that's something that we should aspire to. But in order to do that, we have to have a greater core to the club, and I think getting a home here would help that. I think getting that mini section up and running would help that. So our ambition, while we're continuing to evolve the club, is to be the best amateur club we can be in the area. And I believe that the moment you stop being aspirational as a club is the moment you start withering. So we have to aspire to going up to the next level. Wherever we are placed, we should always aspire to go up, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really healthy way to go about it. It doesn't necessarily mean you will, but as long as you're trying to keep improving, because of course the every chance is that most of the clubs around you are going to be improving as well.
Absolutely, and we were in a beast of a league last season, and I think one of the problems with the pandemic for ex-Rs clubs like ours that didn't have a mini section was that you lost a season and a half of players moving to the area. And so our recruitment was zero. And we really felt that last season, and we went back down to two sides, both of whom finished in the bottom couple of their leagues. And it was a real struggle for us, and we had some horrendous defeats. But when we finally found our feet towards the end of the season, we reversed some of those big defeats with some very healthy wins. And so there was a pathway. But it has taken an effect on us for sure. Yeah,
interesting. Okay, so is your role now here as Director of Rugby, how much do you get involved in the coaching on a weekly basis?
Yeah, so I try and turn up to training once every 3 or 4. I don't want to be the kind of annoying director of rugby. I mean, I used to be the director of rugby /coach. Don't get me wrong, but
okay. That was going to be my next question.
I'm a level 2 qualified coach, but I think the challenge is that you know, if guys listen to my voice for 20 years, I mean, hell, I'm surprised my wife stayed with me as long as she has. But you know, I think if you are constantly evolving that coaching team, then as a director of rugby, that includes you as well. You should try and move away from being involved in day to day. But I am involved in, you know, advising on selection. I am absolutely involved in recruitment, retention, in running the coaching teams, running the physio teams. You know, we have a head coach, we have a head physio, and I do all our sponsorship and our PR. I run I do our match reports. I keep the website up to date. Basically, luckily my wife goes to bed quite early because I do a lot of this stuff late at night. She's an actress, so also, which means she's treading the boards in the West End quite a lot of the time. So once I've got the kids in bed, I've got a few hours to spare most nights.
What's she in at the moment?
She's just rehearsing now. She's going to go to The Life of Pi and begins in September. She's got one of the lead roles, so I'm very proud of her. She's you know, had a stellar career to date. She was in the latest Bond movie. She had a small part in that, so we're very excited about The Life of Pi, and I shall certainly see that a few times when I get a chance.
Fabulous stuff, wonderful. So let's go back to when you were more involved in the coaching. What kind of a coach were you? What were your kind of ideals? How do you like the game to be played? These kind of things.
Yeah, great question. I'm heavily influenced by a few people actually. There's an amazing coach I had in the Pats called Paul Morris, who's now at Cinderford, and as a Gloucestershire coach as well. And PM had. He liked things done in a certain way, so I used to listen and watch when I did turn up to training. And there's another fella called Paul Sargison who ran our twos when I was there. And
I know Sarge.
So Sarge was another ledge, and I loved his enthusiasm and he always brought a sense of humour to things as well. I like us to play an all-court game. I am somebody that likes to have a big pack if I can have it. I don't mind the rolling maul. I like us to play rugby in the right parts of the pitch. I'm also somebody that's not big on the bullshit that comes into rugby. I hate the idea that people talk about a process and a project. All that sort of stuff drives me nuts. It's not. That's just rubbish football talk. Get that out of here. So for me, you know, I want us to be competitive. If we lose a high-scoring game, or if we lose a game, I don't mind as long as we've given it everything. As long as we can walk off the pitch with a head held high and feel like we gave it everything, I've got no qualms about that, no problem about that. And if a side plays particularly well against us, I'm not averse to going into their huddle and telling them what I thought. And you know, I don't think I've ever done that, and that's been badly received. I think as coaches, we should be able to appreciate when someone's done well against us. So, you know, I like us to be generous in victory and defeat, and to play a pretty expansive game of rugby when the time's right.
Yeah, fabulous. That sounds like, well, it's almost making me want to put the boots back on and come and play, Dickon, to be honest. Bit beyond that now, but...
But it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because one of the things I say to the younger coaches that we have is when they stop vicariously reliving their playing days through the players, they become far better coaches. You know, the coaches that you see on the touchline, and there are some who've been recent Prem players that we've come up against in recent seasons. Their behaviour on the touchline, both to the referees and their players, you know, is awful. And you look at them and think you're going to have to come a long way to become a better coach. I don't think, by the way, we're necessarily served with a great example by the England head coach, but I do think that at the level at which we play, we should be able to look our opposite numbers in the eye, shake hands, have a beer, and forget about what's gone on, to be able to talk about the game one-to-one afterwards.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just sort of a more general point there about coaching and growth in coaching. I coached full-time for 3 years. I say full-time, you know, as a director of rugby over at Old Patesians. And the amount of growth that I noticed in myself over those 3 years was ridiculous. And that's just the first 3 years. Like, I can't even imagine beyond that how far there is to go, what there is to explore, and all those different avenues. So for somebody who's been doing it for a lot longer than I am, like, how was your, I hate to use the word journey, but I'm going to use it. How was your time?
Yeah, I think I probably am able to be a bit more dispassionate about the game watching it now than when I used to be. We've got a thing, another innovation actually. We bought one of those VO cameras that slices and dices the game up, and so we'll be able to do a lot more analysis. And the other thing that enables me to do for the season ahead is I take notes normally to write the match reports. So my head is often down in my phone. And in high scoring games that can be a challenge. So I'm not going to have to do that now because I'll have it all on video. That innovation will help. I think it's difficult when you're a director of rugby to not just be another supporter. And you have to try and disassociate yourself from that. It is a role where you still have a vocal part to play. I still go into the halftime huddles. I still give my 10 penneth. I will constantly be in communication with the coaching team. It's not a big coaching team when you're running 3 teams. So sometimes we will only have one coach pitch side. And so my role becomes even more important then. For home matches, I set the pitch up. I'm still the guy here an hour before everyone else going put everything out. I like doing that. I'm probably, my wife says I have OCD, and part of it is that if I let someone else do it, they don't do it right. So I like doing it. I get the lads to take all the stuff in afterwards, but I still enjoy doing that. And I do think you have a role to play. I still change in the changing rooms, which I think is a few of the lads' question. But when you sweat as much as I do, you can't go out in your smart gear. That's why I do that. And on an away game, invariably, we don't have as many coaches. So I have a coaching role to play, and I do play it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's good to hear. So let's go back a little bit, maybe to rugby beginnings for you back in Cornwall, I believe.
Absolutely, yeah.
So tell me a little bit about how you got into the game and your early rugby experiences.
Yeah, so I'm born and bred a Redruth man. Redruth Hospital, which is now a car park, was where I was born. My old man was a GP down there for 40 years. He's still down there actually, although in Porthtown these days. And I'm one of 7, so I've got 5 brothers, and so I was pretty used to the rough and tumble. My first day at school, in a place called Chewergy School in Redruth, I was sent to the headmistress 3 times on the first day for fighting. Although to be fair, to this day I must get this off my chest. I was never fighting. He threw a punch at me and I ducked and he went over me and landed on his head. So that's not my fault. And so rugby was something that you kind of had to play in Cornwall. You didn't. When I was a kid, you never played football much. You played rugby. I then went to an amazing school called St Urban's School, which is also now a car park. There's a theme there, and it was run by a guy. The headmaster was a guy called Mike Jenkin, who played for the Pirates in Cornwall. And Mike was a rugby enthusiast. He used to teach us maths, but if maths clashed with the varsity match, we were all round to his to watch the varsity match. And I loved stuff like that. We'd all sit on the floor, boy and girl alike, and watch the varsity in his house. And the Barbers as well. We watched Barbers matches. And, I will give away my age a bit here, but you're talking about mid-70s. So some amazing rugby. And Dad used to take us to Hellfire Corner, and we watched. I remember the American Eagles playing and throwing the ball one-handed like an American footballer from sort of the middle of the pitch to the wing. And just being completely wrapped up in seeing the Southwest play some of the touring sides. And we're talking massive crowds, 10,000 plus at Redruth, and Camborne, and going to see those games. And I played mini rugby at the Pirates. I played a couple of games, I think, at Redruth as well. But St Urban's was in Penzance. Mike was the Pirates. And amazingly, my scripture teacher then was a guy that if I'd have known now, if I'd known then what I know now, I'd have made more of a story of talking to him. It was a guy called Rex Carr. And Rex was the president of the RFU, the whole RFU, and was an integral part of the Pirates during the post-war period. And I look back on that and think, gosh, that fella who used to smack our heads together if we talked during scripture, properly smack your heads together, would have had some amazing stories to tell. So it was a school steeped in rugby, and I remember Mike telling me once that I should never give up on the game, and those words have stuck with me all my life. And I was lost to football for a period. I played in an amazing league called the Mining League in Cornwall, which for all it's worth, had players that should have been playing rugby in it, frankly. But it was a good grounding in my teenage years. And then when I moved to Cheltenham to live, I ended up at the Pats.
Yeah, okay, cool. So, I mean, I travelled across Cornwall last year on the Great Rugby Run and visited a ton of those clubs. And I think it might be my favourite rugby area, possibly in the whole world, just because rugby is everything there. Like the towns gather around and it feels like everybody goes to the games. I mean, was that your experience as well?
Absolutely. And it still is. You know, I mean, I in my role as Director of Rugby here, I get to interact with a lot of the Cornish rugby clubs, whether it be Lansdowne or Redruth or Camborne or, you know, players from Roseland moving up here or wherever, you know, Hale or wherever, all over the county. And the thrill I still get from going to those clubs, even in the off season, and just looking around, you know, there's something in it. As you say, you go to Roseland and it's like, what's a rugby club doing there? You know, and yet they're there, and the amazing pitch, amazing setup. I love it, and all the sort of towns have some affiliation with rugby. The only other area I think that's a bit similar is the Forest of Dean, and I loved going to when I played for the Pats and we played Lydney or Drybrook or Cinderford or Berry Hill, I loved going to those clubs. I mean, Regensholm at Lydney, you know, the way the post-match, the way those guys greeted us, it's fantastic. You know, fantastic rugby clubs. And so I've played all my rugby in two hotbeds of rugby in Cornwall and Gloucestershire, and I feel very privileged to have done it, and you will have experienced some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I grew up and born and bred in Cheltenham and played all my junior rugby there and into the seniors as well. And yeah, those Forest of Dean clubs are something else. It just feels like it almost feels like it's a different game there, because there's, I don't know, Gloucestershire and Cheltenham are really passionate about rugby, but it goes up another level, I think, when you get to teams like that.
It does, and of course we shouldn't forget all the clubs in Gloucester, and I mentioned Matson, but you know, Gordon League and clubs like those are equally steeped in the game, and these clubs go up and go down. Long Leven's another one. Cracking clubs. I know there are lots of clubs in Gloucester. You mentioned us, I'm sure, but you know who you are. There are a lot of clubs up there who are great to have played against and really are steeped in the game of rugby. And you know, I'm somebody who, given the opportunity, whenever I finish here, and I have no time scale on that, my Saturdays I won't be going to see Premiership or Championship rugby. I'll be going to see grassroots rugby, where it's free to get in, where it's earthy, and you know you're not seeing a kick chase, and you get a decent pint of real ale afterwards.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Now, talk to me about playing for the Pats, because as I said, I grew up in Cheltenham and played for the Cheltenham club, but the Pats is actually my old boys team because I went to Bates Grammar School.
Amazing.
So it's a bizarre coincidence, really, that the Pats came up through the leagues and gained promotion to the national leagues at exactly the same time as Old Patesians did in London, who I happened to be playing for at the time then as well. But your experience with the Pats?
Yeah, so you know, we were coached, as I say, by PM and Sarge, and we had a tremendous run, really, for a club that didn't pay. It really weren't paying. We trained twice a week. I've never known really why the Pats train twice a week, because sometimes we get like 10 on a Tuesday, and then everyone would turn up Thursday. And I only turned up once a week. I was a terrible trainer. I don't mind admitting it. And the other problem I had is I love so many other sports. I love horse racing, and I enjoy football. I love cricket. And if Cheltenham had a horse racing meeting on, sometimes I'd put that ahead of playing for the Pats. And what I didn't realise is, you know, being regularly available is how you get to go up to teams as well as performing well. And I was not regularly available enough. And that's the one tip I'd give to players joining a rugby club. Be regularly available, because you'll get your opportunities if you are. The Pats at that time had recruited Chris Raymond from Worcester. And Chris had a tremendous influence. We got an amazing fly half called Andy Armstrong. It was a cracking team. We had the Tuckers, Ralphie, I think Toby Mayer played for Cheltenham for a bit, but he saw the light at some point, I think. We had a really strong side, a big pack behind an amazing team, and I was able to stand and watch that. But of course, we played second team rugby, and as I say, that second team, you know, you had Cinderford and Western-super-Mare, Bridgie, you had Taunton. all these clubs. And by the way, I must tell you a little anecdote. We played Taunton away once, and Taunton had a very similar strip to the Pats, and it was a really sunny day. And at certain angles, you couldn't tell the two teams apart. And that day, I think we went down on a coach to Taunton from Cheltenham. And there was a lad none of us had seen before who was a dead ringer for what most of us thought Jesus would look like. And I remember in the game, we turned around 20-0 down. And in the second half, this lad scored a hat-trick. And all of them, he went down the wing and he had a running style that looked like he floated. So it didn't look like his legs were moving. And to this day, when I talked to any of the lads that were still involved that day, we said, well, Jesus won us the game. Because we never saw him again. He came amongst us. He scored 3 tries. He won us the game 21-20 at Taunton. He was never seen again. So he is alive, people. He's out there. But
sounds like Jesus.
It was Jesus, yeah. So I'll never forget that. Amazing. Yeah, but it was an amazing league. That West of England merit table was... the standard of rugby that we played at that level was really good. And I think it was really important to a successful first team at the Pats that there was that really strong second team. And it's something we've tried to get here. It's why I've got Cam Crozier as our second team coach. I want the twos to feel they've got a dedicated coach who is looking after them in the way that Sarge looked after us at the Pats.
Yeah, you're dead right. That's a hugely important thing. And going back to something else you said about being available, I think as every year goes on, that will become even more important in terms of moving up through a club if that's your ambition. Because we all know that players are getting a little bit more flaky nowadays and other things, there's competing priorities and things like that. So just being the guy who's always there is a real strong sort of string to have to your bow.
I agree. I think we are seeing that now. I think it's going to be difficult during this period where we're not sure if we're going to start on time or not, but that availability will be key. And I really don't want to be in a position where the league goes ahead and some players self-select out while the ground is so hard, because I think that will be even worse. You'll have mismatches that will create even more injury problems for clubs, and that's why I think the RFU really, I think they're waiting for rain that's going to come next week, but it's not going to be enough and it's not going to be in time to enable players to be match fit for me for September the 3rd.
Yeah, and that's a really important point about, you do all your pre-season work, you work really hard on the training pitch. Those pre-season games are vitally important in terms of getting match fitness, because very few people will play 80 minutes in those games. They tend to be squad affairs where people are rotating, playing 40 minutes or whatever, quarters sometimes. And it's a vital part of fitness. And I completely agree in terms of safety as well and getting people prepared for those league matches.
I think we have a duty of care, and as much as I know everybody doesn't want to be in a position that we're in the pandemic where we weren't able to play, this isn't a no, we're not playing forever. This is it's not safe right now. And I think that's a really important message. Just going back to the question you asked me about the Pats, the other thing that I think was really interesting that has driven my motivation as well in part is that I wasn't quite good enough to make the squad that won at the Intermediate Cup. I sat in the stands and watched, and it was cheering on as we won by the narrowest of margins. Playing against us that day was a lad called David Dalrymple, who was fly half for Blaydon, who was the team we beat. Some years later, he came to London Cornish as a player, and he joined us here. And I always send out the team sheet, I still do it, to all the players. And I used to put, after the players' initials, if we were going by cars, which we always do, I used to put car after the player that had the car. And we had I don't know if I can say twat of the match, but that is that if I can't. We had a twat of the match award post-match, and David came up to me one week and said, I need to talk to you about something. I'm like, David, fair enough. He said, why do you annotate Cornish lads by putting CAR after their name every week? I said, David, that's not what it is, David. Just that actually says car.
Oh dear.
He said he thought it was Cornish and registered. Oh, so yeah, he won that award that week. But that defeat has followed me. So I've twice been involved with coaching Cornwall. The late great Benji Thomas got me involved, and Benji is another huge influence, a magnificent man and a great coach and a huge influence on a lot of players and coaches in Cornwall. And he invited me to come and join the coaching team with a role of spying on the opposition teams around the country, wherever that might be, and then bring back reports so that Cornwall would know what they're facing. And I did that and carried the role into Graham Dawes' era as well. But both the finals we got to, we lost. So I've been to Twickenham once as a supporter of my own club and twice as a coach, and I've not yet won. Now, I've supported Cornwall winning, and I was there as we continued to dominate the county championship. By the way, against a Caldy outfit. Or they weren't Caldy, they were, would it be Cumbria? I can't remember.
Excuse me, Rugged Boar here. I think you'll find it was actually Cheshire that Cornwall defeated that day, and the score was 37-24, in case you wanted to know. Anyway, as you were...
Who had walked away with National 1 to go to the championship, and I think thought they were going to thump Cornwall, but were hit hard early and never really recovered. But I have a burning ambition at some point to be a winner at Twickenham. So at some point, I will throw my hat back in the ring with Cornwall to try and see if I can be involved to get that evasive W at Twickenham, because that's unfinished business for me.
Yeah, for sure. And especially, I mean, like I say, rugby in Cornwall is just everything. And like the people that I spoke to last year down there, who talked about it, just said it's the biggest thing. Like, it is the biggest thing for them. So, I mean, I'm sure as a coach and whatever role, it must be, I'm sure it's the same for you.
It is. And I keep in touch with Graham regularly, very regularly, and with a lot of the lads, that I've known over many years in Cornwall. It is, absolutely everything. You weren't. As soon as I was old enough, you were given a rugby ball to hold one. I think you're given a rugby ball, and it is everything. The whole county will listen in or watch or be involved in the county championship. It's galvanising for the county. As an exiles club, we feel it sometimes when we travel to far places and suddenly a veritable mini Trelawney's army appear, dressed in black and gold, and it warms the cockles of my heart whenever I see that, supporters dressed in their colours coming to support London Cornish, because we are their club as much as Cornwall are their county for the county championship.
Sir, are you sure that's correct?
Let's move on, shall we, to the Rugger Law Bore section, which used to be a question about the laws of the game, but we moved on because I think sometimes, nowadays in particular, every single refereeing decision seems to be scrutinised to the nth degree, and in my opinion, it's become a little bit of a dirge on the game. The days gone by when, refereeing decisions were, it's always a little bit of grey involved, and you just respected the referee and got on with it. Certainly at the top level now, I think there's less and less of that, and I'm not sure it's a good thing. I was just interested in your opinions on that and anything around refereeing, I guess.
So hopefully the London Society will feel that Cornish are a club that they can send their referees to, and the knowledge they'll get have a good time. I feel strongly there are two things I look for in referees. One is they're up with play, and two is that they apply their interpretation of the law equally to both sides. I don't care what that interpretation is, I just want it equally applied. And if they've done those two things, I've got no qualms. So I'm quite happy to walk to a referee we've lost very heavily and been pinged off the park and say, well played, referee. Having said that, one of the things I always also think is important for referees is to try and stay behind to have a chat with the players or the coaching teams because I think it humanises the coaches a little bit, and I think they can help build rapport by doing that. We seem at level 6 to get a lot of aspirational referees, and I've no problem with that. It's great that and I look at the national leagues and often see refs who've reffed us going on up, and that's great. But I think the ones that have done really well are those that come asking for feedback, and we shouldn't be afraid to give it to them, and it should be rational and it should be non-critical. And maybe it's your hand signals are not clear enough, or you have a problem standing in the channel on the attacking side. Quite often, you need to look at your positioning, or maybe you aren't up with play. Maybe you should look at your fitness. I wouldn't say that outright to a referee, but that is going to become more apparent with VO being used by more and more clubs to slice and dice the action. We sometimes do get referees who come and have videos, or mentors or referee coaches coming with them. And so maybe they feel that that's enough. But I think you should always talk to the players and the coaches of teams as well. I think that rapport is really important. As I say, the London Society are very open, and we've had some great refs come through. And I don't have a problem with referees. I think if a club or players ever spend their time blaming a referee, they're blaming the wrong thing. And I always say to our lads, if they come in cursing a ref, that we should be good enough to take a decision by a referee away from being the thing that decides a match.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, my time as a DOR, the vast majority of refs would come and ask me for my opinion. I think I can't remember too many that, I mean, maybe there was a couple that had to get away or something like that, but the vast majority would. So it would sadden me if, like in the last 6 or 7 years, that's on the decline, because I agree. I think it's a really valuable thing for both sides, because sometimes you as a DOR might not fully understand what the referee was doing in particular, and he might have a different stance on it, which is, you know, worthwhile and interesting to hear. So I think, yeah, I completely encourage referees to come and talk.
And I think the other thing as well is that, and again, this is one of the challenges with the reorg, is that you can also build a bit of a dossier of how the referees apply their interpretations, so that, you know, referee A, you know, don't hold on the ground, lads, he'll ping you straight away, or referee B, in the older days, used to say, you allow a bit of rucking. You know, when we got a West Country exchange ref, I said, right, lads, rucking's back. And by the way, that's the number one thing I'd bring back straight away. I would have rucking back. I think it'd make the game safer at this level, particularly. I think it'd make the game far safer if you had rucking allowed again. And clearly not by the head or the neck, but I think rucking has a part to play. And I think, you know, we are the poor of the game for our inability to communicate with referees, and as I say, I go back to clubs who have former pro players who are berating referees as the perfect example of how it should be done.
I've never had any time for that as a DOR myself. It's I don't know, I just think the referees I think it's probably one of the toughest jobs in sports, to be honest, refereeing a rugby game. I don't think there's many tougher, because there's so many areas where it's down to interpretation, and especially in the community game when you haven't got the assistance of a touch judge or assistant referee. I think we should do all we can to encourage and try and build positive relationships in that respect.
Yeah, and I think that goes to, you know, you'll know from your school days, there were teachers who, for whatever reason, you didn't know why, had the command of a room. And it's those kind of referees who have that command that are the ones you're looking for. People just don't question them. There was a guy called Howard Jones who used to be in the London Society. He wasn't a huge guy. He didn't have anything you could necessarily say about him that made him what he is. But his command of the rugby pitch and the players and the spectators was second to none. And the way he communicated with people was fantastic. And I remember him taking down one of our more chippy nines. It's always going to be a 9, isn't it? And just bringing the guy down to a level, I just was like, I want to capture that, because whatever you've done there, you could learn so much from that.
Yeah, okay, amazing. Let's leave the referee talk with that lovely story. Okay, we'll move on to the stash questions now. What's your favourite bit of stash that you've ever received?
Yeah, it's difficult to nail it down to one. But Benji, when I first coached Cornwall, I was part of the Cornwall coaching team, I should say. I obviously never caught up with the team until the semi-finals, and we went to Hertfordshire to play at Hertford. And I was on the pitch, and Benji came out to me with a load of stash, and I've kept it all to this day. It's some years ago now, and I've kept it all to this day. There was a button-up smart shirt, there was a tracksuit, but I'm not a big tie and number ones kind of guy. The best thing he gave me was a polo shirt, quite similar to this one, with the Cornwall logo on it. That's my most treasured piece of stash, because it was given to me by a guy I really respect, for the only team that I'd really, that's my Cornwall and my county, my country, and so that's my proudest bit of stash.
Awesome. Okay, what is your favourite kit of all time? So this can be any team, any era, anything.
I thought about this one. There's something about the Barbers. There is something about the Barbers. I thought, seeing the death recently of Phil Bennett brought it back, and we've all seen that try. There's something about that Barbers kit that is just fantastic, and I love the spirit in which they still continue to play the game. I'd have a Cornwall shirt, the original traditional Cornwall shirt, which is the one that London Cornish wear, as my favourite one. But if it wasn't going to be that, then it would be the Barbers.
Good choice, good choice. And lastly, an awful kit. Are there any kits out there at the moment you just turn your stomach and you'd rather burn than wear?
Well, when kits evolved from being the sort of ones that you and I would have worn with collars and rubber buttons and the sort of thing you could dry a spilt drink with, to things where they say it wicked away sweat, everyone he went to was sublimated kits. And there was, I think it was Doncaster or somebody who had a horrible sort of green top and it went sort of grey halfway down, and it may not have been Doncaster, so I apologise to the Knights if they're listening and feel that I've done them a disservice, but somebody out there had a horrendous sublimated kit. And there were a whole load of revolting sublimated kits that teams just thought, oh great, we can do something wild and wacky, and they looked awful. I should imagine not many of them sold replicas, but any of those hybrid sublimated kits that people brought out when they first evolved would be the ones I'd throw in the bin.
Good choice, good choice. Okay, let's bring this to a close. Thank you for your time here, but before we finish up, is there anything else you'd like to add or say at all?
No, I mean, it's an interesting time for us. I think the professional game has a strong impact on the grassroots game. And I mentioned the England head coach before, and I'm sure he probably doesn't listen to these, but I would say to him this. It's really important that when he opens his mouth, he says things that are for the greater good of the game, of the country in which he's coaching. And I think sometimes he does things for effect, and I think sometimes he doesn't always think about some of the things he's saying. I feel like some of the hierarchy at the RFU have inherited him as a head coach. And I know we have him till after the World Cup, come wind or high water. But I hope whoever succeeds him thinks carefully about the impact of what he or she says, because it does have an impact at the lower levels, at grassroots. It will impact parents who are thinking about giving their kids their first rugby ball. It'll impact people as to where they send their children to school. And it will impact players who are thinking about whether this is the right game for them. And so my final thing is just to ask both the current head coach, who I'm sure is a great guy to go and have a beer with, and the person that takes over the role from him, to think carefully about the impact of what they're saying.
Well said, well said. Okay, I understand you might be able to help out people if they're coming up to London and looking for a club and a job and things like that.
Yeah, I mentioned I'm a headhunter. We've got a few at the club actually. So for anyone that's seeking to move up to London, from wherever in the world they may be, particularly the West Country, we are able to push them the way of people that are looking to hire. We can't give you jobs, that's not the kind of club we are, but we certainly have lots of contacts of people that would be able to help you find a job. And so if people want to, they can get hold of me via my email address, which is dmoon@stpiran.com, which I'm sure we can list as an attachment, but it's dmoon@stpiran.com.
Absolutely, that's a really generous offer, and everybody listening, I'll link all of that up along with everything else that we've mentioned, which is quite a lot today actually. It's been great, in the show notes below where you can find them. So lastly, Dickon, thanks so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Tim, I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks very much again to Dickon. Huge experience in the game and plenty of opinions to go with it. Good luck to the London Cornish this year, and if you're moving to London and looking for a job, then it sounds like a fantastic option. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, you could rate and review on your podcast player. You can like, share, retweet, all that jazz. But what I'd really like is if you mention it to someone in person the next time you're down your local rugby club. I'll be back with you next week when my guest will be Scottish sports presenter, CEO of the My Name's Doddy Foundation, MBE Jill Douglas. This is one not to be missed. My legs are recovering nicely now, and I'm looking forward to starting the Great Rugger Run this coming week on 7th of September. So until next week, get out and play. This episode was also sponsored by WebPie for all your WordPress website needs. Do you need a website, or do you know someone that does? Trust the rugby family and think of my company, WebPie, that's WEBPI, for your WordPress website design, build and support services. Find out more at webpie.co, that's WEBPI.co.